My name is Gemma. In my day job, I'm a PhD researcher in film and politics, but I also have a bit of a background in film production, and I've written and directed a few shorts myself. And I'm also quite interested in interactivity as part of my research. And so over the past year, Crossover Labs has offered a series of workshops at film festivals around the country. Each of them were exploring a different interactive platform, all designed to give filmmakers the ability to make their videos interactive. So my job was to participate in all of those workshops and then to write a report on what using that platform is like for a filmmaker. And those write-ups are all available on the Crossover site now. And so this is our panel today. They're here to represent each of the platforms that we've looked at in the workshops. And they're all about to give 5-minute presentations each to introduce you to the software that they are representing. I won't introduce them individually, I'll let them do it themselves. But then I'll come back in and give my own presentation, talk about what I've learned about interactive film as a form, about interactive filmmaking as a process, and then discuss, what each platform is useful for filmmakers in particular. And then after that, we'll end with a Q&A, and you guys can all come in with any questions for me or for anyone in the panel. So I'll have a timer here, about 5 minutes each. And we'll start with Maria representing Klynt.
Hi everyone, my name is Maria, and I'm here today representing Honky Tonk Films, a production company for new media, and the people behind Klynt, the interactive editing software. So, as I said, Honky Tonk Films is a new media production company founded in 2007, and we have several activities, which is 3 main activities actually, that are multimedia production, the development and distribution of Klynt, and consulting and training. So Klynt is the editing and publishing application that's dedicated to interactive storytellers. It was originally designed for our own needs in production, to cut the costs of production and to be able to quickly create an interactive work and to be able to present the work we've done and explore new narrative formats on the internet, so kind of a research and development thing that we used around these new narrative formats. It all started in 2007 with our first production that was Voyage au bout du charbon, or Journey to the End of Coal, where after the release of the project, we were approached by people to do, by France Television, to do exactly the same format of storytelling. So instead of recreating the code all over again, and changing the media, we decided to create an editor. And to be able to reuse the same format that we previously used. So Klynt, since the beginning, it has been comprised of 3 main parts, which are the visual storyboard, where I can have a quick overview of my interactive scenario and the media that I've used in my project, with the links in between all the sequences. And it's also comprised of a media library that has, where I can import photos, videos, audio files, and external web content, such as web videos or even iframes to integrate any other web content into my Klynt project. And it's also comprised of a timeline edition with an immediate preview and an HTML5 player. The latest release of Klynt is Klynt 3. And in regards to the previous versions of Klynt, it is still a desktop application with an HTML5 responsive player, and the player is an open source. And the projects are put online individually, so every time someone needs to, we do not offer publishing services with the software. The new things we've added to Klynt 3 is additional layers of interactivity on rollover and click actions, Photoshop file import, and preserving the Photoshop layers inside the Klynt project. and collaborative working, so several team members can access the same project because it's saved on a shared folder that's synchronized on your computer. And we've also added additional what we call plugins to be able to seamlessly integrate web videos. So previously we had YouTube, and we've added Vimeo Pro and Brightcove. And this is important for us because we plan on recentering the software around interactive video and are actively working on that and have been doing a lot of research and development around 360-degree video. And we've also added a new feature that's additional annotation options for video and audio files to be able to have an extra layer of information and maybe even create chapters within a video or audio file. And we have released a new iOS application to be able to view the content once it's published for Apple mobile users on the dedicated application. So after 7 or 8 years of existence, Klynt today is used by more than 200 research institutes. Is it over? You can push it to try and discover new forms of e-learning, for example, such as Sciences Po in Paris and Harvard University. It's also used by independent filmmakers, independently or with a team of developers, because they can work with the open source and connect to the API of the player. And it's also used by NGOs, so they can communicate better on their urging issues, and as well as media companies such as France 24 and AFP, among other people.
Hi everyone, so I'm Gerald Holubowicz. I'm an interactive producer at Shubat. Actually, we are a company that produces interactive documentaries, and we are working very closely with Racontr to actually produce our production. So let me introduce you Racontr. I'm going to show you that video. So I'm the happy customer, basically, and I created some stuff with Racontr. Grozny Night Cities, which is that, won the first prize of web journalism at the festival Bayeux Calvados, which is a journalism festival. So we won that last year, and we published Grozny on Mediapart and Polka magazine for the French part, and Radio Free Europe for the European part. And Monocracy Room 501c4, which was about the campaign financing laws in the US, and it was published in 2012. You can do a lot of things with that, like creating web docs, long-form interactive video, animated database, serious game, you name it. The whole point of Racontr is that actually you can customize it very quickly, very easily. You have like a tab at the bottom of the screen where you can inject like your own JS, JavaScript code or CSS code if you are a developer, or you can export the whole project and then after that add on top of that your own code. So you have a basic product that can be done without even coding, and if you are an expert you can just extend the experience. So you can do something like this, the Conf PR, something that was done for the French presidency last January. Or Casque sur le Front, it's a long form about difficulties about living in Syria and using extensively comic strips. So it's like using 3D parallax kind of video. La Nage de Glace, which was done by a school, the IJDJ, which is a journalism school in Grenoble. So it's a long form, basically. And Francis Holm, which was about the serial killer Francis Holm. The good thing about it, it's really easy. That's my experience after that, but it's very easy to actually to create something with Racontr. For one, just one story. Moneocracy that you saw before was done in 10 days, and Grozny 9 Cities was done in 15 days. Just because we had very tight deadline, and we had, you know, for Moneocracy, that was the election, and we just went back from the shooting at the end of October, and we had to put the whole thing together in 10 days. And we did it just because we had that. So it's fast. You can just, you know, create something very quickly. And it's fun because you can actually wake up in the morning, just have an idea, and you just, you know, put something on Photoshop, you import the file, you have a page that is already done, and you just have to put the interaction in it, and you have a project at the end of the day. So basically, it's very quick for that. That was Racontr.
Hi, I'm Florian Thalhofer from Berlin. I started as an artist. Thank you very much for inviting me here. It's an honor to be on this panel. 15 years ago, I invented by accident a software that later on was called Korsakow. So what is Korsakow? And I also have a video. So Korsakow is a software for authors to create rule-based films. So because of my timing, rule-based, what does that mean? So authors create the links between snooze in an indirect way. So they don't drag and make a link between this snooze directly. They create the rules, how the snooze are linked. And that allows authors to create flexible films. A film that behaves differently every time a viewer watches it. And sometimes also in a way that the author didn't expect, which is wanted. So Korsakow films are rule-based, flexible, and usually interactive. Korsakow is, I spent 15 years with it, and I think it's a philosophy and it's a principle to structure narrations, and a couple of formats came out of Korsakow. So there's obviously the Korsakow film that is usually web-based. There's the Korsakow installation with multiple screens. There is an interactive Korsakow show with an audience and experts that comment on the film. And there's a Korsakow presentation. This is not a sounds much nicer. This is not a Korsakow presentation. This is a very linear presentation, by the way. So Korsakow is a philosophy. And actually, film is also a philosophy. I learned that. Film and multilinear film encourages linear causal thinking. So what is multilinear film? Well, okay, we all know what linear film is. That is basically film, one scene after the other, glued together by an author one time and forever. And multilinear is when an author pre-thinks the experiences of the user, because he has there are decision points and the user can go this path or that path, can be more complex than this image. But the author pre-thinks the experience of the viewer. And there's Korsakow, or rule-based films that encourages multi-causal thinking. So not one cause has one effect, but multiple causes have an effect. So there's a rule of thumb when you should use Korsakow or another system. And film and multilinear films are good if the author knows what he wants to say, if he wants to convince the audience of something, for example, if he wants to raise awareness about the topic. So what is Korsakow good for? Korsakow is good for if the author wants to find out, gain understanding, and document something that people in the future with future brains can look at that and make up their mind what they see.
So similar to Gerard, I'm not a creator of this tool. I'm a user, or we could say power user. This should do it. Okay, start. So I'm a user of this tool, and Korsakow asked me to run the workshop about this platform. basically, Popcorn.js is an HTML5 media framework. What does that mean? When we look at any kind of website, that is created out of 3 ingredients: HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. HTML tells your browser what is represented here, CSS tells your browser what does it look like, and JavaScript tells your browser how do things interact, how does it behave. And that last part is where Popcorn.js comes in. It's basically a way to extend the natural language of JavaScript. It extends sort of vanilla JavaScript, if you like. And how does it do that? What it particularly focuses on is it makes it easy for a video, an HTML5 video, to play nicely with the rest of your web page. Before we had HTML5 video, this was a little bit what video on the web was like. It was a black box. You can maybe have some buttons on there where you can hit play or pause, maybe toggle the volume. But it was really difficult for the rest of your web page to know what is going on in your linear video. And Popcorn changes that. So what does Popcorn do? Popcorn basically combines together with HTML5 video to make your media pop and to let different things happen on your web page depending on where are you in the video. So one thing that is important is, in my experience at least, filmmaking, especially documentary, is a little bit like sculpting. You go out and you take your recordings and you record generally as much as possible, and then you take that back to your editing stage and you carve out, and it's really a kind of an art of not showing rather than showing, whereas webmaking is a very different process where generally you start with an empty text editor and you start really from scratch. Not entirely from scratch because you have building blocks to use, and Popcorn.js is one of those building blocks. So it does one thing really well. It lets your web page know about and talk to your video or your other time-based content, which can also be audio. So this project was launched by Mozilla. It's developed open source by Mozilla, along with Catherine Zizek's brilliant 1 Million Tower as part of the High-Rise project. And I'll finish this sentence. And so this was basically part of Mozilla's strategy to say, hey, as filmmakers, we have an opportunity to use the web as our medium of expression. The last point I would like to make is that this is how you use Popcorn, so you still need to work with someone who writes JavaScript. There's also a graphical user interface, but that's more interesting for teenagers, I think, if you look at the design. So finally, the last point I would like to make, and let's discuss this all together, is if you really want to make something really unique, you either, I think the ingredients you need for that is custom HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, beautiful content, a good narrative, and a multidisciplinary team of developers and filmmakers working together. Thank you.
So my name's Clare Tavernor. I'm a producer at the BBC working mainly in arts. I made my first interactive project just at the tail end of last year, start of this year, which is a kind of behind-the-scenes interactive gig with the hip-hop act Run the Jewels. And I used Interlude Treehouse as the software to make that happen. Interlude is a kind of choose-your-own-adventure kind of software. It's very familiar in format to anybody who kind of used to read those books where you'd make choices and it would take you down different paths. I've got a little video actually, which it kind of shows you it shows you my project in real-time screen capture of how you kind of navigate through the kinds of things that you can do. So that's a kind of overview of that project. I came to Interlude because the BBC's got a new interactive platform called Taster, which is encouraging people like myself who are linear filmmakers to come up with ideas and pitch to make interactive projects. Actually, I might just skip off that. So the idea is to get lots of people who have got kind of lots of great editorial ideas but aren't necessarily coders. So I know absolutely nothing about coding. Like, I know what it looks like and that's about it. So software like Interlude gives you something that looks like your familiar kind of video editing interface. So for anybody who's sat in an edit and made a documentary, this is the kind of thing that you'd be looking at. So you've got a space where you can view your media, you can see what your clips look like. You've got a bin down the side that's got all of your different assets in. It's also got all of your buttons that you might want to add within the program. So when you want to give people the option to interact with your project, you can kind of drop those into your project. My project's actually a mixture of buttons that are kind of baked in that have then become kind of activated in this part of the software. What am I doing? This is like just to illustrate my lack of technical ability. Okay, never mind. Or you can have buttons that the software itself will allow you to place and alter the kind of transparency of them and what they're going to do. You could maybe, when you move your cursor over them, they might activate and become highlighted so that you know what you're doing. It's a really kind of instinctive way of working with interactive video, I think. And for the viewers, it's very obvious of what you're going to do, but all the content is contained within the platform, that's worth saying. So it's unlike other programs where you're able to link out into other things. So all that content is stuff that you've chosen and you've kind of worked through. Am I still making this weird noise? Okay. It's not you. It's not me? Okay, excellent. So this is what your treehouse might look like, and this is very illustrative of the kind of philosophy behind Interlude, is that it's kind of a space to play, and you can make your kind of parent material, and then you can kind of drag it into other nodes. So you start to have this kind of treehouse effect, and I think that's really what they're trying to do with the software, is just kind of give you something that you can drag and drop your media. You can work out how it's going to link back. So similarly to the snooze idea, which is actually, it's very different to yeah? Killer, okay. So it allows you to see where your nodes are going in and out. It's worth mentioning that if you want to kind of jump out of your node, like, as a filmmaker, you want to make your nodes like little chapters, and they're just like contained chapters, but actually, because of the way that this software works, you can't do that and jump back seamlessly into the same place. So you actually have to break your film up in the places where you want to give people interactive options, which feels really bad when you start doing it, but actually, you know, and maybe that's because I was trying to make it do something that it's not particularly designed for. Should I just shut up? One more thing. One more thing. It was designed by people who are making music videos, which is actually, it's good to know because it's brilliant for that kind of thing. So if you've got a music track and you want to flip between different camera angles or different people doing different things that are all in sync, then Interlude, it's brilliant. It's a very exhilarating tool to use if you want to work in that way, because it does do it really, really well. So, yeah, there you go. Thanks, Claire.
Okay, so the last thing is, the last platform is Storygami. Unfortunately, Guy and Heidi couldn't be here today. They're in San Francisco, but they've sent us a video presentation. Okay, cool. So thank you, everyone. We'll come back to you in a little bit for the Q&A, where everyone can just jump in and ask questions to the panel. I'm going to talk a little bit now about my thoughts and what I've learned about interactive platforms and interactive filmmaking. Although I'd like to start with just a little bit of context, not with the platforms themselves, but begin with tech industry developments a bit more generally by saying that a couple of weeks ago, Spotify announced that they're going to start a video streaming service designed to accompany their music service. The Guardian ran an article about it and had this to say about the new direction for the company. I've written down that quote here. Spotify is trying to position its announcement as an evolution, not a revolution, of its business. Something along the lines of music was just the beginning. Now we will add TV clips and podcasts to create an entertainment platform. One could say that Snapchat made a similar move a few months ago when it began offering video updates on top of its messaging app. So the writer in the article is a bit pessimistic overall about what Spotify and Snapchat are both trying to do. I think, thought they were sort of abandoning their unique selling point as businesses. Maybe they were sort of flailing a bit in response to disruptions in their sector, rather than focusing on what made them unique. And whether that idea turns out to be right or wrong, what was interesting to me is that the writers sort of detected an emerging trend. Some of those really big online media platforms want to be multimedia experiences. I know the word multimedia is a bit sort of old-fashioned when we're talking about this, but it's kind of useful for vocabulary for what I want to talk about. So that kind of rich content of adding images and text and sound and all sorts of other things. But these companies are kind of intuiting, or their research is suggesting that that's an important thing to have. And they're seeking to present it as evolution, not revolution, a sort of natural progression from what they already do, rather than something that's moving away from their unique selling point. So it's interesting, I think, that The Guardian saw that as potentially messy or as change for the sake of it, whereas these guys are seeing it as responding to something that's becoming an emerging standard, something that we expect as online users, consumers of media. So I know that Snapchat and Spotify are both technology companies who are trying to expand their businesses to serve consumers. So they have a different perspective, really, compared to most of the people probably sitting here. They're not production companies, they're not filmmakers. Even though they're encompassing video now, they're not making films as an end goal. But when we look at the world of interactive film, it really is worth always sort of broadening our sort of assumptions and horizons a little bit and thinking laterally, rather than just thinking from a more pure sort of film industry perspective and that sort of development process and that world, really. What I've kind of learned is that when you start using interactivity, your film becomes part of that same really enormous, complex online media landscape. And the way that they deliver content is going to potentially probably influence what audience expects interactive to look like in general. They're all going to be feeding into each other. So it's not just other filmmakers who you're sort of standing beside, it's all of those guys, everyone who's competing for attention and producing different things. So it's a whole kind of complex area. And I know that Florian has discussed this as well at his workshop. He talked about the relationship between the online tech world and interactive film, and if we have time or if it goes in that direction, I might ask you about that later. So we're seeing more and more value placed on concepts like immersion, integration, engagement, and participation as well. So of course there's interactivity itself. Spotify announced on the same day, in fact, that they're also going to have playlists that adapt to your running pace when you jog, and they're promising other responsive playlists as well. So that idea of that participation is really becoming crucial. There's this expectation that people want to be actively involved with what they're viewing or listening to or whatever, that they assume they're going to be able to steer its direction or change its pace. So even though interactivity has a fairly long history and been around for a while, like you can think of like CD-ROMs or something that allowed a little bit of interactive, it's over the last few years that it's really started to find its language in the online space. And a lot of that is sort of being articulated and it's kind of being formulated by these platforms because of their ease of use, because you don't necessarily need a programmer. Many of the companies represented on the panel today started developing their interactive platforms just a few years ago. So now they're kind of at the forefront of interactive filmmaking and helping to define the form. But what is the form? And you've seen a little bit of it in the presentations there. From my experience with the workshops, using the platforms and doing my own research, interactive platforms for filmmakers are sort of emerging into sort of two distinct types. And it's a bit of a generalization, but hopefully it's a useful one. The first one is the type of platform that allows you to take lots of video clips and create multiple potential narratives. Filmmakers can add clickable buttons to appear at certain points within their videos, which then allow the audience to choose their own route through the story. And very broadly speaking, Klynt, Racontr, Korsakow, and Interlude Treehouse kind of fall into this category. And yeah, if you want to label it for convenience, and Clare mentioned it as well, that's kind of the choose-your-own-adventure format, if you remember the books, where you can kind of choose the direction you take. So that kind of format for interactive engagement. The second is what's been dubbed time-based interactivity, and I think that's Philo's phrase. There's usually one single video, or main video, as it plays, buttons or icons can appear at predetermined times for the viewer to select if they want to. Those buttons can allow the viewer to explore an aspect of the video story in a bit more depth. It might open up an image gallery or bring up a biography for someone who's being interviewed during that particular sequence. So the other two platforms, Storygami and Mozilla's Popcorn, in particular Popcorn Maker, you saw the interface just there, could both be characterized as time-based, or again, just to give them a label as the kind of press the red button platforms. If you think of, like, it's a more sophisticated version of what the BBC does, still does on TV for their sort of interactive service. You press it for a bit sort of richer media. So those two are the two prominent forms, I think. So I think there are a few things you can read into that. You can see how, as it develops its own form, its own style, interactivity is being conceptualized in different but in complementary ways. So with Storygami and with Popcorn Maker in particular, it's a tool that can expand the capacity of the film's frame, what the rectangle can be made to hold, really, the sort of black box, as Philo said, and make that richer. And then that allows for complexity. And so then the other thing is that it's also becoming a tool to expand a film's capacity for narrative progression and deviation, to let audiences perhaps change a narrative, change their minds, go back and forth through a story. And that brings its own complexity, of course, so you might end up giving your audience a feeling of freedom and power that they can explore what they want when they want, or by forcing someone to make choices, you can kind of make them feel trapped because they're being compelled to decide something. And that would be up to you and the kind of story that you're telling. So both of those approaches are considered non-linear storytelling forms, but they're really not the same non-linear storytelling forms. That kind of phrase really encompasses both. They overlap, but they're kind of different grammars, different languages. Some of the choose-your-own-adventure type platforms here do allow you to add annotations as well, allowing the narrative to branch, and as well as allowing the narrative to branch. But that hasn't actually made the second group obsolete. It's important for one to kind of make sure you balance the two types of interactivity if you use them, kind of articulating it well so that the film doesn't become overcrowded. But mainly, the advantage that those other platforms have, those time-based ones, if you want to make a project that has annotations in the frame, is that they're both really fast. Video can become an interactive project within hours, really. For both platforms, you take a YouTube URL, you paste it into the interface, and then you start making your overlays, the buttons that will lead to your extra media within the platform. And then when you finish, the interactivity doesn't show up on YouTube itself, but you embed your finished project onto other websites. For Popcorn Maker, you can actually share it on a communal sort of forum. And a big difference between those two press the red buttons platform is philosophy. Popcorn Maker, developed by Mozilla, invites its users to kind of remix the internet, and Philo mentioned that it's kind of a teenager sort of thing, and you can see that in the sort of spirit of it. And a lot of users, they use it they actually take videos by other people from YouTube, and then they'll create mashups with various content. Storygami, meanwhile, is a startup, and you can kind of see that in their kind of in the video as well, that kind of aesthetic. And they've got their philosophy, again, it was mentioned, of keeping technology out of storytelling. So, as Guy says, the idea is that you take your own videos and use Storygami as an efficient and sort of unobtrusive way to give them a bit of depth. Your project can then hold a lot of detail, but without bloating the actual video, as it would have if you tried to include it all within that single narrative in a linear video. Guy also pointed out, which is pretty interesting, the political significance that technique could potentially have. A project could include all sorts of optional educational details that could be followed up by the viewer in their own time. So I think interactive filmmaking used in that way has the potential to make journalistic documentaries, social justice activism sort of a lot more complex. And perhaps resist the tendency, something the Guy touched on as well in the workshop, towards oversimplification that you sometimes see in social media campaigns and news reports. But the choose-your-own-adventure and narrative branching platforms also have their own kind of potentially political uses. I remember Mark Atkin at the workshop talked a little bit about how by kind of making these choices, you can potentially get empathy as an audience member if you're, watching a film that's been made in one of those multiple branching narrative platforms. You can use both Klynt or Racontr to create the kind of immersive interactive experiences that you might have seen in some online journalism. The kind of thing you see on the BBC where they try to go a bit sort of make something a little bit different and add a bit of extra content within the site itself. And both platforms I found were very well suited to taking a long-form story, which might comprise of lots of video clips, photos, audio, from one sort of big, complex story, and then restructuring it so that it's experienced by viewers or audiences as an investigation or an exploration. The key with those platforms is the emphasis on a story's narrative unfolding. That's kind of how you experience it in a particular way. A story can then be expressed from a lot of different angles as the viewer makes their way through different routes. They might start again when they're done and try different choices and different pathways. Find new sequences, choose content they previously didn't look into. An important difference just to add between Klynt and Racontr is that Klynt is downloadable software and Racontr is online as a platform, so personal preference might dictate which in particular you would choose for a project like that. And somewhat similar in form was Interlude Treehouse, and again you saw the interface in Clare's presentation there. So like Klynt and Racontr, the interface on which the filmmaker develops the interactive features of the project has a layout comparable to editing suites like Adobe Premiere Pro, Final Cut Pro, that you'd be familiar with. So they have their monitor, they have their media libraries. But all three platforms have taken on the sort of visual structure of a mind map. And again, you saw them there to allow their users to design the narrative pathways. And it's nice and simple, dragging and dropping to form those connections. For Treehouse in particular, one advantage it had was simplicity in terms of the mind map. It only represents the narrative pathways, and that's kind of it. So it's very simple. And each node, as Clare was saying, kind of represents your media asset, and then you connect using dragging and dropping to make a path. All the more detailed parts are kind of done on the monitor itself, where you make your markers and sort of time when buttons are going to come in and things. Like Racontr, Treehouse is an online platform, which also has an online community for sharing interactive projects, while Racontr's community shows a kind of preference for reporting and, as I say, a bit of a sort of political slant. In Treehouse's playground, you often find music videos, tutorials. They play around with format a bit more. And Korsakow is, I think, I found it was something of a wild card when I was doing my research and attending these workshops. And a distinctive feature, as Florian touched on, was the potential not just for narrative choices, but for randomization. Project pathways can be predetermined, but K-films, as they're called, can also be randomized, with new possibilities generated with every choice made by the viewer. So that freeform approach to narrative logic has had the effect of leading to more abstract and formal kind of experimentations with the platform, such as a film called Fibonacci Korsakow by a guy called Matt Saul, which takes from a database of Vine videos and it makes a viewing experience that never repeats itself. It just kind of draws different things from that database each time. So Florian described it there as a rule-based filmmaking experience where the filmmaker, rather than plotting out every permutation of a narrative path, can have their project play out according to the rules that they institute in the design. The interface is unique to Korsakow as well. As he said, assets are connected with keywords instead of a mind map, and they sort of lead in and out of different videos. And so it's an unusual workflow and different to the others, but it's really not too difficult to pick up, and it can lead to really unique possibilities in terms of interactive experience building. Yeah, and of course, you can use all of them without knowing a line of code, with the exception of Popcorn.js. And if you remember there, you got Popcorn Maker, which was the interface, which looked a bit like Storygami, and whereas Popcorn.js is the JavaScript library, which you'd get together with a programmer and you'd build something more from the ground up. But most of the platforms you can use without knowing any code, but a couple of them do have open source aspects. Korsakow and Popcorn Maker are open source, and Klynt's media player, I believe, is open source as well. And so, you know, you can kind of play with that if you want to, if you have someone you can work with. So as I say, I was writing the crossover reports over the course of the year, and as I was writing, I tried to, they're on the website, and as I say, I tried to almost make them crash courses rather than kind of kind of going off on kind of the philosophy too much or anything, because I wanted anyone reading them, hopefully if you check them out, to really try them out, like to get over any sort of minor worries that they might have or concerns about how they work and just really get to grips with them so they could play with them. But as I was writing, something I noticed as I went on was that I kept running into the same problem for each one. And it's a problem with vocabulary and sort of terminology, because the filmmaker, or you could also call them the storyteller, for a given project is the person who engages with the interface of each platform. I kept referring to that person as the user. So probably you guys, the person, putting all the stuff into the interface, building the story, the creative. But because they're building an interactive project and designing a user experience, really, for an audience, I also kept wanting to refer to that hypothetical audience who are going to be watching the film as the user too. So it's kind of that person at the end point, which of course would have gotten pretty confusing for anyone reading those write-ups. And yeah, similarly, like during this presentation, I know I've referred to people who engage with your project as the viewer, even though that kind of seems inadequate because they're really not just viewing it. Sometimes I call them the audience instead, but even that seems too passive a term to describe engaging with interactive. So I mention it because I just think that those language problems I had were revealing in some ways. When it comes to interactive platforms, there are two users, the filmmaker user and the audience user. And they're inevitably going to share common experiences. I mean, one thing, just for a start, is that if the construction of a narrative doesn't go so well, if you get a bit confused, they're going to get a bit confused. That it's easy for these things to get quite complex. Obviously, the way you kind of get around that is design it carefully from the start and then go into it. And yeah, but your problems quickly become their problems. But more significant, I thought, was that when the project is released, the decisions that the audience user makes aren't just afterthoughts, they're not just add-ons. They're not just a bit of response of, oh, I like the film, or I didn't like the film, what did I think? But they have a creative decisions as well. And really there is no endpoint audience. All the options you present to them in the project have now given them their own platform, really. Whether it's by them building a new context for the story you're telling when they click certain multimedia buttons but not others, and then how they explore further outwards into the issue you're exploring or the story you're telling because of those decisions they've made, or whether it's because they're making choices in terms of how the narrative's progressing, which have the power to change or modify the narrative as it unfolds. So I think it's crucial to understand that two-user situation if you want to understand interactivity and where it's going in the future. Interactivity, when it's used imaginatively and really put to good use, it's not just non-linear as a form of storytelling. It's really something else as well. And everyone here already knows about how film and filmmaking and an audience's experience of film as a medium, all of those things are changing because of the internet. But I'd like to emphasize that it's not just channels of distribution and coming out of the cinema and onto laptops or phones and stuff that's changing. It's not just the way that we present stories that are being disrupted. I've kind of learned over the last year that the audience is there with you in the process. They're integrated into the workflow, basically, in the edit suite, making decisions with you. They're now producer, commissioner, co-editor. Interactivity is not just call and response, it's creating more of a feedback loop between everyone who engages with it, where ideas are able to flow between the project maker and their audience. And I mean, some of those platforms directly allow users to integrate live Twitter feeds into their projects, for example. Or you might design an interactive film that lets the audience leave some feedback at the end of a project so they can tell you what they thought of it. But you might go further and not just give them a feedback space, but give them a space to let them contribute their own stories, which others would then find when they came to the project later. So it really keeps growing. And the mutual nature of that influence makes creative development, I think, it's not just collaborative. It's an ongoing process, even after an interactive project has been released, which I think is exciting because of platforms like the ones that we've got represented here, interactivity is expanding. And because it's now becoming accessible to independent filmmakers, if you don't have funding, like a lot of these are free or relatively cheap, or for people who aren't coders or can't afford to hire coders. So I think it's going to have consequences for online storytelling that'll be surprising, that'll be innovative, and that are going to have a scope and a reach that really extends what anyone is predicting at the moment. Okay, so that's me. And you'll notice that I didn't have a timer. Okay, so now we can take questions. If anyone has something, raise your hand. Okay, great. Whoever gets the mic first wins.
Hi, thanks for the presentation. It's really interesting to see the different software that you've got available. I would quite like to have seen the more comprehensive demonstration of each of those. I can see direct applications for some of them immediately spring to mind. Popcorn, for example, I can see being used. Corporate media, news gathering and display. What was the name of the software that you used, Claire, for the BBC?
Interlude.
Interlude. But my company's previously used interactive displays for museums using a system called Intuiface, which seems quite similar. So like I said, I can see direct applications for them, art installations, extra content, similar to what we've had with Blu-ray and DVD previously. Easter eggs, that kind of thing, for people who really want to dip a little bit further into what they've been watching. What I'm interested in, if any of you know, what level of research has been done, if any, maybe the BBC's done some, in terms of audience demand for direct interactive film or television as opposed to an optional extra. Does that make sense?
Yeah, sure. I mean, BBC is doing loads of research about the way that people are finding this content and the kinds of things that they want it to do, and that's what Taster is exactly about. That is about putting stuff up in a kind of experimental form and then seeing what people think about it. It's all about kind of trying it, rating it, and sharing it. So there's loads of information that's coming back from that, and it was just launched in the very end of January. So all of that stuff's starting to come in. I think it's hard to know, like, it's really difficult if you ask somebody, like, do you want this? And they kind of go, I don't know. But if you give them it and then see whether they interact with it. And Taster's been going really well. I think everybody was really pleased with the amount of kind of engagement and, you know, and a project like, sorry, oh God, I'm hopeless with these things. A project like Run the Jewels was really highly, it was the most highly kind of rated of all the projects that went up on that big launch for Taster. And I think a lot of that is about the fact that interactive actually gives people it gives you the opportunity to have a very specific experience of something. So it finds its audience. Like if people really like that band, then, you know, it's going to be out there on the internet. And it wasn't geo-locked, so it was viewed in like nearly 90 countries. So it spreads really quickly. So there's definitely, I think, there's things about the way that people encounter it that's really important. And I think we'll just have to wait and see. I would imagine that the fact that all these different platforms are putting, you know, really thinking about how people might want to use them and then changing, constantly evolving and developing is the thing that tells you that people want to do it. That we're not just serving them something because we're finding it interesting.
Sure.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And with the idea that sometimes the best thing you can do is just create something and put it out there and see how people use it, right? And that's one of the things that Taster does, and what Taster is for, as I understand it, but also what all of the tools do. And I actually worked with Storygami last year, for quite a bit of last year, building the part of the platform that does user analytics, because we as authors of these tools may have all sorts of ideas for, okay, how does it work best for the user? But, you know, a lot of times we also don't know. So the best thing is just to create something and see what is the response and compare things and let that determine how you create it. So that's sort of like a different form of user research, if you will.
One more thing. I think in terms of interactivity, there is an experimentation going on for now, I think it's 40 years, and it's called video games. So people are very aware about what is interactivity in their daily lives. I mean, we are playing games on, you know, phones and all that stuff. The only thing that people are not prepared is non-fiction interactive stories. They are not accustomed to the concept of, you know, discovering a non-fiction story where you can interact with the narrative and all that stuff. But other than that, you know, we can wait 10 years and we, you know, ask us the same question in 10 years. I think it's going to be pretty obvious. Everyone will know that actually you can do that.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think it's, yeah, that point about how people pick it up and whether it's natural to them or not. It's something that Guy touched on in the video actually about sound and people not necessarily taking to it. And in the history of cinema, the same thing happened with colour, that people thought it was unnatural. They thought it wasn't, it shouldn't be part of the medium. They found it weird. And it's kind of hard to get into that mindset now because we think of it, you know, sound and colour as being, you know, because they're close to our real life experience, that's natural to us. But it wasn't what audiences were used to. And it wasn't what that format was thought to look like. But as these things are emerging, and as Gerald says, they're actually around in our culture and have been for quite a while, audiences do understand this stuff. It is becoming natural to them. So it's not quite the huge hurdle that some make it out to be, really. Yeah, can I have the next question?
Hi there. I just wondered if there's any projects that you've seen that, because you're all offering, some, obviously as just discussed, they're all offering something a bit different, and I wondered if there's any case studies out there that you found that people are using, you know, projects in collaboration with each other at all, or, you know, if there's anybody using both Klynt and Racontr together, or Interlude Treehouse. I mean, it seems like that's maybe the obvious option, but have you seen anything like that happening in
For Klynt and Racontr, we are...
Oh, yeah, very soon. Sorry, no. I mean, well, I guess I was thinking more like Interlude...
Other,
yeah. I was thinking more like Interlude Treehouse, probably.
I've never seen anybody do
nothing like that.
collaborative work. No.
Well, the interesting thing is, of course, when sort of the world of Popcorn.js meets one of these tools, right? So what you guys touched upon briefly was that this is a tool that is very good at one particular thing, and it sort of like offers those abstractions, so you can do one type of project, but then you can, on top of that, have extensibility to customize it further. And that's where sort of your custom HTML and JavaScript comes in, and that can include a building block like Popcorn, but it can be, include any kind of customization that you do in code.
Yeah, so an example might have been, I guess, Katrina Zizek's high-rise, which used Popcorn.js as part of its code library, but also used WebGL to get the sort of 3D elements and a whole host of other code. But that's less an example of using those platforms with interfaces and more an example of using different code, as you were saying.
Can I just ask, is there anything that, with the platforms that you've showed us today, that where you can actually manipulate the image more rather than a temporal kind of chapter change? Say if I wanted to change the hue of the sky or something like that through a user choice, does it have to be a complete video replacement at that chapter where you make that choice, or is there a way that you can manipulate the video itself? And that, obviously there is with code if you hard code it, but I wondered if there's a out-of-the-box user interface tool that allowed you to work similar to After Effects or something that you could, through your user choice, you could manipulate the image in a more kind of, a really interesting transition.
You're thinking of in-browser chroma keying or like color grading or
sure, well, things, or? Reacting to somebody's choice on screen, you know, if you wanted it to go from night to day or something like that, but have the same video, but so changing the hues of the actual video itself rather than replacing that video for a nighttime video. Does that make sense? Is there
certainly in Interlude you duplicate your video, and but you flip, it'll seem seamless, it'll look seamless, but the way it looks in your browser is that you have parallel videos then, so one is night and one is day.
Okay.
And there is an Interlude project that's done exactly that, where you're on a journey in a car and it flips between a kind of sinister night scene and a kind of very light-hearted, it's a car advert, so it's a very light-hearted daytime scene, and so you get this duality, but they're two separate videos. You're not affecting the actual video itself.
Okay.
I think it's a technical problem because the video is hard-coded. I mean, and the browser cannot, enter inside the code of the video. There is some experiment. I think I remember, but it's not working very well. So.
Yeah. So I think most of them designed at the moment for you to have done that in the editing already.
I was wondering if any of these tools allow you to add content in a dynamic way and update the content that you add as your project evolves. So I work for an organisation which we're constantly receiving new videos, new photos, new texts, new stories, and it would be great to be able to use a tool to collate these different media into a project which the audience can keep coming back to and see the project kind of evolve in a kind of organic way. From what I've seen in the past, once you've published it, that's it, you can't make changes. I was wondering if any of these tools allow you to do that.
Well, if I'm going to answer for Klynt, I don't think that once you've published a project, it's up to you whether or not you would like to add something to it or not. And once you publish a project, it's always easy. The new files that you've changed or want to add to your project, you can directly upload them and not re-upload the whole project. So I mean, depending on what you mean by dynamic content, like if you would like to do a montage of your video, you have to do that first, and then you just need to upload it, and you can update your project. And furthermore, if you have like a web page, it's automatically going to be updated if this information, if this web page is embedded or this web content is embedded in your project. Automatically, it's going to be updated once you update it, and so your viewers can view it directly in its new form.
But you might very often run into problems when you create a complex structure, like choose your own adventure kind of structure, and then you want to add other material, because you have to go through all this structure to adjust that. Korsakow, because it's linking based on keywords, is very, you can just add new material and it fits in, it finds its way on its own. So it's very flexible with that, and I've done projects where I've been working. I mean, they're basically not finished. I changed them. I've been changing them for 10 years. So, yeah.
Thanks. Yeah, like something like Interlude is kind of a sealed system. So it's none of those video elements are connected to the internet. Like though it's on the internet, they're not reading new information from elsewhere. So yeah, that is a brilliant function, that if you can get something that has that outward-looking kind of ability, but it just depends on what the tool is, like what it's designed to do best.
I mean, I'm imagining a kind of timeline where you would post, I don't know, an image gallery and then a video, and then, you know, I work for Médecins Sans Frontières, Doctors Without Borders, so in a case where there's an unfolding emergency, you know, the content that we're receiving is just complete, you know, is evolving over time. We haven't got time to sort of wait for it all to come in and then build a story. It would be great to be able to start with something small and then update the kind of experience as content comes in.
But you have to also think about the way you would like to structure your content, because let's say, for example, you have a video and then you get another video or another photo. It's not maybe practical to put on top of the video the image, so you have to have a basic structure of all the possibilities, and then you can update it any way you would like to, yeah?
I think it's so the way you see the story. I mean, all the projects that I showed or the project that we produced are made by filmmakers or journalists, or and they tend to actually you know, have a project that has a beginning, a middle, and an end, and that's it. And when it's released, there is no update, there is nothing. But with all the tools that are available here, I think you can very easily create episodes of the same story. I think it's very easy to do that on Klynt or Racontr or with Popcorn.js or that kind of stuff, where you can just update the next episode and next episode, a bit like, you know, the Walking Dead game has done for quite a long time. So, you know, it's more how you're gonna tell your story, how you're going to think about your story in terms of interactivity and updates.
And what kind of structure you want to give it.
Because basically, Racontr and Klynt also, but Racontr, we are able to actually you know, it's very customizable, so you can do whatever you want actually.
Great, thank you.
Hey, I'm a filmmaker myself, and I'm interested. Are they purchasable, those softwares, and are there trial versions out there? How much do they cost?
I think we each person would do it. Les prix et s'il y a des périodes d'essai.
For Racontr, there is. So I'm not the commercial guy of Racontr. So, but it's there is a trial version. Or I think it's pretty. There is a basic free version where you can, you know, have a minimal space for storage, you know, for the media and that stuff. I think pretty much all the features are already in, and after that, if you want to increase your storage, you just have to pay. There is a couple of plugins also, and they're working on more. Maybe some that will allow dynamic updates also. So and it's not that expensive actually. It's like I don't remember. I don't recall the prices, but just go on racontr.com and you'll find them.
Yeah, I think like with Klynt, it's not a monthly subscription. It's a one-time fee. You can have a trial period, so you can install and test for free for a limited time, of course. And then pricing, depending on whether it's for education prices or professional prices, there are like different pricing for the licenses, and a special edition for students that's around 50 euros. And then you can go up to the pro edition that's for like 500 euros. That has all the features.
Okay, Korsakow also has different prices for different people. So for projects below 3,000 euro budget, it's 50 euro. Academic version 30 euro. And if you make like a big project with a budget of 200,000 euro, you have to talk to us.
In terms of Popcorn, both Popcorn.js and Popcorn Maker are both free and open source.
And Interlude, I know the professional Interlude license is quite expensive, but there is a cheap one that if you're kind of using it just for experimenting and trying to see how this tool works, then it's not very expensive, I don't think. But I don't know for certain, because I don't work for them.
Yeah, I think quite a lot of filmmakers can use Interlude Treehouse for free, and it's only if you're part of a very big institution, I think you will have to go for their paid models. And then for Storygami, I think it's free for the basic stuff, and you can kind of upgrade to a sort of brand or enterprise system as well. But quite a lot of features are available for free. It's more in terms of how many videos you want to make and exactly the kind of analytics or tools you want from the software. Okay, any more questions?
Yeah, Gillian, have you got a web link to the research that you've done? It's on Creative England. Is it also published as an academic paper?
No, sorry, it's published. It was basically a series of blogs, and those are available on Kosovo Lab's website. They're listed under the blog section.
Hi, thank you. This has been wonderful today, hearing all of these options. I'm just wondering, once you've made your story, is there support for getting your story out? Because I'm just new to interactive documentaries, so how would I go about doing that?
What do you mean by getting your story out?
Well, like you get your story up online and you've hopefully gone through some kind of audience building, but is there support for, because I don't know, like, I know we can come to festivals like this and hopefully get into an exhibit space, but what are the other ways of getting to your audience? Is there support through company? I don't know.
Well, we offer a service where you can upload the thing, like we offer web space, but you can also upload it easily to any other web space that's there. But we can't find you an audience. You have to do that yourself.
Well, the thing on Racontr, it's you have the platform and you have a social platform around that. So basically, the idea is that all the users that are here can just go through your project, and plus they are marketing different projects. They have the Racontr pick, where every month they pick one project or several projects and that they push. And we might want to work on an extended version that could make display great projects in a different way. So yeah.
And our case, for example, we have a project gallery where we add the projects to it, but this, of course, doesn't say that, okay, maybe people will go to the gallery but not necessarily view your project specifically. And depending on the project, well, we've done several things with several people. So, for example, sometimes we have a small interview on our blog with the link towards the project, so towards your website or whichever link you would like to post, and of course social media where we share the projects. And it has also happened to us to encourage a small team of independent people. We have paid for a small Facebook campaign to push their project forward. So it all depends. I mean, we don't find your audience for you, but like if you contact us, there's always things we can do together, or maybe even advice we can give you. So
Interlude has an area called Playhouse where all the Interlude projects are up there. Not the BBC ones, because they're kind of, because of the copyright issues around BBC content, that's all hosted elsewhere. But yeah, there's a kind of a community and a collection of all the works that are produced there. And then certainly with BBC projects, if you partnered with, or if you pitched and had an opportunity taken up that way, then there's always opportunities to get things on BBC platforms.
Yeah, so similar to these kind of galleries, Popcorn Maker has something similar where people can find your project, and not only they can see it, but they can also click a remix button where they get to see sort of behind the scenes, what have you created, and create their own version of your project.
Yes, that kind of feeds into their whole philosophy of like mashing up, like remixing the internet. The idea is that, yeah, audiences are really supposed to not just respond, but participate and get involved and make something new themselves. But the original version is preserved as well, isn't it? It's kind of
exactly, yeah. So when I remix your project, I edit a copy.
Cool. Any more audience questions?
Hello, I just produced my first interactive documentary film actually this year in Finland, and it was done on a platform which can be shared, embedded everywhere. So you can embed it on a Facebook, on newspaper sites, and basically everywhere except in YouTube. And it was extremely important in order for the outreach and getting the audience. So did I get it right that some of you don't, it is not possible to embed it, or are your platforms possible to embed elsewhere?
Yeah.
Of course.
Like everywhere?
Yeah,
so that is okay, then I misunderstood.
Course, as you said, because YouTube is a
closed
closed format, so you cannot add buttons to like, you cannot put your own interactive content into a YouTube video, of course. But for all other platforms, yes, of course, you can embed it on any website or, yeah.
Okay, brilliant, thank you.
Yeah, as Gerald was saying, that's done with iframes and stuff. It'll like some of the platforms kind of generate a line of code that you then use to embed it.
For the platforms, like I know it's the case for Racontr and Klynt, but for the other platforms, you can generate it yourself. I'm not sure if all of you do it, but yeah, and it's so easy.
Yeah, looking at.
Yeah, I mean, like when you build your project completely custom with your own Popcorn.js and the rest of your web development, you do self-hosting, and then I would always advise people who make their custom web doc to build in that kind of embeddable functionality, and as well as sharing, but that doesn't come out of the Popcorn.js box. Popcorn Maker projects, they do have that functionality where you just have an embed code, just like you can embed a YouTube video on any web page.
And yeah, and actually I was like speaking to someone from the Telegraph just the other day and at the festival, and yeah, and she mentioned as well just how important embeddability is, like to go back to that sort of business question and the kind of influence that other, that sort of area is going to have on the shape that this takes. It can be important for monetization as well, that it's possible to embed this stuff on, if The Guardian asks you to make an interactive web doc, they're going to want to be able to put it on their site. So yeah, it's important. Yeah, sorry, was there another question?
It's a naive question, but I came because this was called Interactive Filmmaking 101, and what I'm really hungry for, and I've been trying in the last couple of years to make it in my own head with some interactive work I've been doing for universities, but it's very limited. Have you got between you any sort of checklist for a comparison matrix to help you decide how to approach a project and what sort of software to try and look for? I mean, there's the lovely distinction between the choose your own adventure or thickening up an existing narrative. That's one sort of decision. What are the other decisions you might make? I mean, I found myself thinking, okay, Apple devices are not going to be able to show this, so I can't use it for this project. That's another major decision. What sort of major decisions would you think you'd want potential users to have really thought about before they come to a particular software?
Most important question, who is your user and what are they looking for? What is their motivation? Are they iPhone users? Are they going to visit this in the morning, on mobile, on a desktop computer, on a tablet? Do they even want interactivity? That's going to be, I would say, the first guiding question to ask. Well, yeah. Then from there on, you can go ahead, right? If you have answers to that, then you can have a look at, okay, what are we able to build in order to answer those motivations? So, is there motivation for something that is personalized, right? Different platforms and tools offer better solutions for that challenge. Or is it something where it's contextualization, where something like Storygami or the popcorn functionality comes really into play?
And what type of media you're going to be using mainly? That's really important. If it's mainly photos or videos, photos with audio files, and where this project is going to end up, like on what kind of website, on a news website, on my personal website. There are hundreds of questions.
Yeah, that's the look around you. I mean, if you have a team with a graphic designer and a journalist, you might, and you know a little bit of code, you might want to try Racontr or Klynt and use Popcorn.js to inject that into Racontr, or if you are a filmmaker, maybe you just want to use Interlude because it's simple and you can just focus on the picture and figure out the narrative on top of that. But it's relative to the asset that you have and the money and the time, and I think the user, yeah, for sure. Wow.
Well, the nice thing is that with HTML5, there is, but as that's becoming kind of a standard, I think some of the issues of compatibility and viewing things across platforms and things are kind of lessening. So you're getting less of that kind of flash problem where the plugin won't play. Stuff is kind of works in browser, and these platforms have at different times kind of added that responsiveness as part of their part of what they offer. So it's less of an issue, luckily.
Also, I think just once you get started, you'll suddenly realise what it is that you're asking that piece of software to do. Because I took on Interlude thinking, oh yeah, I'm making this branching narrative, but once you're actually doing it, you suddenly realise that actually you want to give them some biog information about one of the band members, and Interlude doesn't just it won't push you out to an external page, so you have to then generate something that it becomes more complicated. So I started to try and make Interlude do things that it's not actually particularly designed to do. But that really teaches you a huge amount, because then you suddenly start to ask those questions about, well, what is the option I'm giving them now, like, and how does that affect my narrative and affect their journey as they go through it? And I just found there was a moment where it just made sense to me thinking this way. There was like a moment where it kind of clicked, and you started, and then suddenly all of those questions became very, very clear, like the things that I had to go through and tick off my list. I know that's not a very good answer, but I think it is just playing with it. Yeah, playing with it, and then you start to visualize your film in a really different way.
Which one to start playing with?
But most of them will allow you to have a little go. Yeah. So I would just go and have a look and look at projects in detail, and try and visualize what it is that you're trying to offer. You know, how is this affecting your story? And I just did a crazy map. You know, looked like absolute insanity, but that was like my little Bible for like how these things might work together, and where I needed to return people back to, and what these different kind of flows of information were. And it just makes you see it in a really different way. And if you're a traditional linear filmmaker like I am, it's seeing it is the most important thing, to me anyway.
Yeah. And I think it's true of every single one of the platforms. And I mean, I'm kind of used to the kind of interactive thing now, the kind of language, and I kind of get what the field is like and stuff, but even so, I think right at the start, you know, it's not, you know, a terrible learning curve. It's really quite swift, and yeah, like these guys are saying, you can download or sign up to any of them for, you know, at the very least, like a trial period, and try them out. And yeah, it's really, they've all got tutorials. There's contextual information online, and it's really not bad at all. Just picking it up, seeing what happens, and seeing what comes out of it. Were there any other questions? Okay, then I think we'll wrap up now. And I'd like to thank the panel. Thank you so much. That was really interesting. I hope you liked it.